If you ever find yourself hiking deep in the Smoky Mountains and stumble upon a small wooden doll leaning against a tree, turn around. Don't touch it. Don't ask why it's there. Just leave. Welcome back to History They Buried, where the past is never truly dead, just hidden. Each day, we unearth the forgotten, the covered up, and the unspeakable truths buried beneath everyday lives. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a warning. This is the macabre history of the Walker sisters and the silence of Wye Hollow, a story of isolation, secrecy, and the darkness that festers when no one is watching. Picture a stretch of mountain land so remote, so shrouded in mist, that even daylight feels muted. They called it Wye Hollow, a name that never appeared on tourist maps and rarely passed local lips. But in these woods, legends whisper of 6 sisters who lived by rules no one else understood and kept promises no one dared to question. It began in a time when Appalachia was already struggling to breathe. The Great Depression had reached into every hollow, and most families either starved or left for the cities. But the Walkers stayed. Not just stayed, they retreated. Mile by mile they pulled away from the world, until only the mountains knew their names. At first, folks thought it was grief that drove them to such isolation. After all, their father, John Walker, had been a respected man, a farmer, a craftsman, a father of 11 children. But by the winter of 1921, death had hollowed the family like rot in a tree. 2 sons lost to fever, a mother buried too soon, and scandal that burned like a quiet fire through the church pews. The remaining daughters, 6 of them, clung to one another as if blood was the only lifeline left. But John Walker left more than land behind. He left words, instructions carved into the last pages of his journal like scripture. Blows. God is the only true bond. Those not of our blood cannot be trusted, for they do not share our suffering nor our destiny. Those words became their law, and laws in isolation have a way of hardening into something else, something monstrous. Before we continue with the story and unspeakable secrets, I want to ask you something important. This channel is not for everyone. Only the bravest souls who dare to confront the darkest chapters of American history. If you made it this far, you're not like most people. You understand some truths are too horrifying to ignore, no matter how much they disturb us. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments what state you are listening from. Are you brave enough to hear a story like this from your own backyard? Because the deeper we go into Wye Hollow, the darker it gets. To understand the darkness of Wye Hollow, you have to start with the man who planted its first seed, John Walker. The Walker family name once carried weight in Cade County. John wasn't just another mountain farmer. He was a man people trusted, a carpenter with calloused hands and a reputation for honesty. He taught at the local schoolhouse, sang hymns with a voice that carried through the valley, and even preached from the pulpit on Sundays when the pastor was ill. But the man who returned from the Civil War in 1865 wasn't the same man who died in 1921. Something broke in him, not all at once. It was slower than that, like water wearing stone. At first, the changes seemed like grief. Diphtheria had swept through the mountains in the 1890s, taking 3 of John's youngest children in one cruel winter. Then Margaret, his wife, fell ill. Some said a stroke, others whispered something worse, something done behind closed doors. She never spoke clearly again. After that, John stopped coming to town, except when he had to. Then came the murder. A neighboring farmer dead in a dispute over land. John's oldest son, William, charged but acquitted on self-defense. Still, the scandal burned the last bridges the family had left. People in Cade County began crossing the street when they saw a Walker. By 1900, the Walkers were ghosts at church socials, names whispered, not spoken. Isolation didn't just happen to them, it became a choice. John pushed the family deeper into Wye Hollow, past the reach of gossip, past the laws that governed everyone else. By 1910, they were almost entirely self-sufficient, and John, aging and bitter, began to write. His journals, later found in a forgotten archive, read like scripture for a religion of one family. The world beyond our boundaries grows more corrupt each year. Our family stands alone in righteousness. We must preserve our purity at all costs. By his last winter, his handwriting trembled, but his orders didn't. Remain together, do not sell the land, never trust outsiders, and above all, keep the family secrets as you would keep your soul. What were those secrets? He never wrote them plainly, but there are hints, chilling fragments about tests of loyalty, keeping the blood pure, and something he called the promise. When John Walker was buried in the frozen ground of Wye Hollow in 1921, 6 daughters stood at his grave: Louisa, Martha, Hetty, Josephine, Sarah, and Jane. The men were gone, dead or scattered, and those 6 women, they obeyed his every word. From that moment on, the Walkers turned inward. No church, no visitors, no world beyond the ridge. Just 6 sisters bound by blood, by grief, and by a father's command that would become their law and their curse. After John Walker's death in 1921, the homestead didn't die with him. It hardened. The 6 Walker sisters took his words like scripture. They rarely ventured beyond their hollow. The trails that once connected their world to Cades Cove grew wild and overgrown, choked by roots and thorns, as if the land itself wanted them cut off. Locals began to whisper that the Walker women didn't need the outside world anymore. They had everything they required up there: food, water, and each other. At first, people pitied them. 6 women alone in those mountains, working the soil with their bare hands, hauling water from the spring, spinning wool by lamplight while the rest of the world roared into the Jazz Age. But pity turned to unease when they stopped coming to town altogether. By the mid-1920s, sightings were rare and unsettling. A hunter would catch a glimpse of black dresses moving like shadows between the trees. A child fetching water at the creek swore he saw a figure watching from the ridge. Motionless, silent, eyes that didn't blink. The sisters began selling baskets and quilts through intermediaries, leaving goods and picking up cash at a designated spot near Cade Creek. No words, no thanks, just goods left and gone. People started calling them the Hollow Witches, not for spells or charms, but because they had vanished from ordinary life and taken on something other. But the real unease began in winter. When the snow fell thick and the game grew scarce, odd things happened. Dogs disappeared from neighboring farms. A trapper claimed he lost half a deer carcass overnight, dragged away by something strong. No prints but human ones in the snow. Still, no one spoke it aloud. Not yet. This was Appalachia, a land that respected privacy, even when privacy stank of something wrong. Then, in January 1927, a school teacher named Grace Adkins failed to return from visit. Being a friend across the ridge, search parties combed the trails. They found nothing, no blood, no tracks, no scraps of clothing. The mountain had swallowed her whole. Or something else had. 2 weeks later, a hunter stumbled upon a clearing deep in Wye Hollow. In the center stood a crude wooden figure, a doll about 2 feet tall, carved from a single piece of timber. Its face was a blank oval, but someone had pressed strands of real hair into its scalp. Human hair. Pinned to its chest with a hand-forged nail was a strip of gingham fabric, the same pattern Grace Adkins had worn the day she vanished. The hunter fled before dusk, but not before he noticed something worse. 6 pairs of footprints in the snow, circling that doll like a ritual. He never spoke of it publicly, only to his brother in a hushed voice with a warning: "Don't go near Wye Hollow. They ain't right up there." From that winter on, the mountain's silence grew heavier. And the Walker sisters? They were no longer just women living alone. They were something else now, guardians of a secret so dark it would take decades for the first truth to claw its way into daylight. Next, we uncover the first official disappearance that pulled the sheriff to Wye Hollow. The first call came in on a brittle morning in February 1927. Sheriff Robert Delmore was pouring his second cup of coffee when the news reached him. The Adkins girl never made it home. Grace Adkins wasn't a drifter. She was a schoolteacher. People noticed when someone like that didn't return. Her friend had seen her leave just after noon, bundled in her blue gingham dress and a heavy wool coat. The ridge trail she took should have led her home before the sun dropped behind the mountains. But Grace never arrived. By the time Delmore rode out toward Wye Hollow, a thin crust of snow crackled under his horse's hooves. The woods were eerily still. Even the birds had fallen silent. Search parties had already combed the ridge without luck. No torn fabric, no blood, not even a scuff in the snow to suggest a struggle. That didn't sit right with Delmore. In these mountains, a cougar might take a lamb, but not a grown woman without leaving a mark. And there was something else. The whispers. Folks were saying the Walker sisters knew something. He didn't want to believe it. He knew the Walkers. At least he thought he did. He'd grown up not far from them, seen them in town as a boy, quiet but polite, selling baskets with their father at market. 6 sisters, all in dark homespun dresses, lined up like fence posts, heads bowed while old John Walker handled the talking. After John died, they'd drawn inward like a snapped shutter. Still, they'd never caused trouble, not until now. The sheriff tethered his horse at the hollow's edge and followed a narrow path up through black pines. The deeper he went, the colder it felt, the kind of cold that gets inside your bones. He noticed something odd about the trail. No fresh prints except his own. Yet the smoke curling from the cabin chimney told him the sisters were home. The homestead appeared suddenly through the trees, a squat, a beaten cabin hunched against the slope like it was trying to hide. The yard was empty, no dogs barking, no hens scratching in the dirt, just silence. Delmore mounted the porch and knocked. The sound seemed to vanish into the wood. After a long moment, the door opened a crack, and a woman's face appeared, pale as milk, eyes dark as coal. Louisa, the eldest. She didn't smile. "Morning, Sheriff," she said flatly. He asked about Grace. Louisa blinked slow, as if weighing each word. "Ain't seen her," she said. "Ain't seen nobody." Behind her, shadows moved. Figures in black, drifting like smoke between the walls. The air inside smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old blood on iron. Delmore felt the hairs on his neck rise. He didn't step inside. He didn't want to. As he turned to leave, Louisa spoke again, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Some things get lost in these mountains, Sheriff. Sometimes it's better not to look too hard." He rode back to town before dark, said nothing to the search party about what he'd seen or what he'd felt in that cabin. But that night, as he sat by the fire, one question kept circling like a buzzard in his mind. What in God's name are those women hiding up there? The mountains give back what they take, but never whole. It was March when the thaw began, and the search for Grace Adkins shifted from hope to dread. The creek ran high and brown with meltwater, loosening secrets the snow had buried. That's when a boy from Cade's Cove, out checking his father's traps, saw something snagged on a fallen log. At first he thought it was a deer hide, pale and waterlogged. Then the current rolled it, and a face turned toward him, or what was left of one. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later. The body lay on the bank, tangled in roots like the mountain didn't want to give it up. The flesh was white, bloated, the eyes gone, lips chewed away by fish. But the worst part wasn't what the water had done. It was what someone had done first. Both legs were missing from the thigh down, cut clean, too clean for rocks or animals. Delmore knelt, jaw tight, his breath a ghost in the cold air. The gingham dress left no doubt. Grace Adkins had come out of the mountain, but not whole. The coroner confirmed what the sheriff already knew. Those cuts were deliberate. Someone had taken her legs, and the body had been in the water less than a week, which meant she'd survived days, maybe weeks, after vanishing. The news spread like wildfire through the coves. Men who'd shrugged off the whispers now nailed their doors at night. Women stopped sending children alone to fetch water, and every story, every theory, circled back to Wye Hollow. Delmore returned to the Walker homestead. This time, he didn't knock soft. He hammered his fist against that grey door until it swung open hard enough to rattle the hinges. Louisa stood there, calm as a corpse. Behind her, the sisters loomed in the gloom like shadows pinned to the walls. He told her what they'd found, watched her eyes. Nothing. Not fear, not sorrow, just that flat black gaze deep enough to drown in. "We ain't done nothing wrong," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were wet. From the sink, from the creek. Delmore didn't ask, because then he saw it, on the hearth near the dying fire, a shape, small, wooden, a doll. The same size, the same crude carve as the one the hunter described, only this one wore something different, a tiny strip of blue gingham tied like an apron. Delmore left before dark. He didn't take the doll. Later he'd tell himself he didn't have enough cause. Not yet. Truth was, something in him balked at touching it. That night the sheriff sat awake with his gun across his knees, listening to the wind claw at the windows. He thought of Grace, of her legs cut clean. He thought of Louisa's hands, dripping water in a house with no well. And for the first time in his life, Robert Delmore prayed not for justice, but for the strength to keep going back up that mountain. After Grace Adkins came out of the creek in pieces, Wye Hollow should have emptied. The sisters should have been dragged from that house and locked behind iron, but the mountains have rules of their own, and one of them is silence. Sheriff Delmore filed his report, but it read like a whisper instead of a scream. No arrests, no headlines. The Knoxville papers ran a single column on page 6. Local woman missing, body recovered. No mention of missing legs, no mention of Wye Hollow. People in Cades Cove muttered, though. They muttered when old Jasper Reed vanished walking home from the mill. They muttered when Caleb Turner's dog came back without him, muzzle sticky with blood. 2 men gone in a single summer, and then a fourth, a peddler from Maryville who never reached his next stop. Folks searched, but searching Wye Hollow was like wading into black water. The deeper you went, the colder it got. Delmore went back to the homestead more than once. Each time the sisters stood there like statues, 6 black shapes in a row, faces pale as candle wax. Always the same answers. "No, Sheriff, ain't seen nobody. No, Sheriff, we keep to ourselves." And they did keep to themselves. No trips to town, no church, no trading face to face, but their baskets and quilts still showed up in the drop spot neat as ever. And inside those neat baskets, Delmore began to notice things. A stain, faint and brown, on the reed of one basket. A loose thread in a quilt that wasn't wool or cotton. It was coarse, darker, like something shaved off a scalp. Delmore burned those finds. He didn't tag them, didn't bag them, didn't send them to Knoxville. Why? Maybe he was scared. Maybe he knew the truth and couldn't carry it where it would lead. Or maybe, and this is what some believe, the mountain had him in its grip by then, same as the sisters. Because when a 5th person vanished, Delmore didn't even ride out. He stayed in his office, staring at the window like a man waiting for a storm he couldn't stop. By the winter of 1928, the missing numbered 6 souls gone without a trace, except for whispers, except for dolls. Yes, dolls. They kept turning up, one nailed to a tree on the Old Ridge Trail, another sitting upright on a stump near the drop spot, its blank face turned toward the path like it was waiting for someone. Every doll the same, carved from mountain pine, stuffed with moss, dressed in scraps of real clothing, and always a token of the missing, a button, a strip of fabric, once even a wedding ring tied around a wooden wrist. The people of Cades Cove started locking doors in daylight, started crossing themselves at the sound of an owl, and when night came down heavy over the ridges, they told their children what their grandparents had told them. Don't wander into Wye Hollow, don't look too long at the trees, and if you see a doll in the woods, don't touch it, don't even breathe near it. But silence. Silence was the law. And the sisters? The sisters kept their lamps burning on the mountain like 6 black candles against the dark. Next, we descend into the chilling winter of 1929, when the truth clawed closer and blood seeped through the snow. By the turn of 1929, Wye Hollow was no longer just a place, it was a presence. The fear had settled like frost on every porch in Cades Cove. Doors were barred at sunset, guns stayed loaded, folks walked to church in groups, heads down, prayers muttered low. But fear doesn't stop hunger. And when winter came that year, the kind of winter that cracks timber and kills livestock, men had to hunt. The first to vanish was Asa Bennett. He was 41, a tough ridge farmer, the kind who could skin a bear before breakfast. On January the 14th, he left his cabin with a rifle and a pack of salt pork, told his wife he'd bring back venison by nightfall. She waited 3 nights. When the snow started again, she sent for the sheriff. Delmore went out this time, but not alone. He brought 2 deputies and a local tracker. They followed Asa's trail up into Wye Hollow through black timber and ice-choked streams. The prince went straight as an arrow toward the Walker place. Then, halfway there, they stopped. Just stopped, in the middle of the white. No drag marks, no struggle, no blood. Like the mountain opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. Then the dogs found something. Not Asa, not his gun. A doll. It was nailed to a fallen pine, arms spread like it had been crucified. Its face was gouged out, just a hollow black hole, and around its wooden neck hung Asa's leather hunting strap, the buckle crusted with fresh blood. The deputies wanted to turn back. Delmore didn't. They went on, right up to the Walker cabin. What they saw burned into the tracker's mind so bad he never spoke above a whisper after that day. 6 sisters, standing on the porch in the snow, in their black dresses and boots, silent, still, watching. Their faces were pale as bone, and their eyes, the tracker said their eyes were empty, like looking into a well. Delmore asked them questions. They never blinked. "No, Sheriff, ain't seen nobody." "No, Sheriff, we keep to ourselves." And then something happened, something that sent the deputies running, leaving Delmore behind. The sisters laughed, all at once. 6 voices, thin as wire, cutting through the trees like wind in a dead forest. The deputies swore it wasn't just laughter. It was words inside the laughter, words they couldn't quite hear but could feel, crawling under their skin. They left Delmore there. He came back at dusk, alone, face white, lips cracked. He said nothing about what happened, filed no report, just locked his office and drank for 3 straight days. And then, 3 nights later, Asa's wife woke to a sound on her porch. She opened the door and screamed so hard, neighbors heard her 2 ridges over. There on the porch sat Asa's rifle, leaned against the rail, neat as you please, and tied to the stock with rawhide was something worse than any body. A doll. This one was painted red from head to toe. Sheriff Delmore was a lawman, but after that winter, folks whispered he was something else, broken. For weeks after Asa Bennett's disappearance, Delmore didn't set foot near Wye Hollow, wouldn't even say the name. But the mountains don't let go easy. Another man vanished. Jebediah Crane, a trapper who knew every ridge like his own shadow, gone without a trace. Then another. By March 1929, 3 men had vanished into those trees, 3 wives left with nothing but rifles tied to their porches and dolls painted red. The sheriff could feel the whole valley watching him. Fear turns to anger quick in these hills. If he didn't do something, they'd find someone who would. So, on a grey Sunday morning, Delmore saddled his horse and rode up into Y Hollow alone. He told no one, left no note. Folks only knew because a boy out hunting squirrels saw him pass the ridge trail, head down, jaw tight. He didn't come back that night, or the next. When he did return, 3 days later, the sheriff wasn't the same man. His skin looked grey, like something inside him had turned to ash. His eyes were hollow, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was so low folks leaned in to hear. "Leave 'em be," he said. "Ain't nothing up there for us. Ain't nothing we can fix." No report, no names, no questions. He nailed his office door shut that afternoon and didn't come out for a week. But there were whispers. A farmer swore he saw Delmore's horse tied at the Walker Gate on the second day, swore he heard singing from the hollow. Women's voices, slow and sweet, rising and falling like wind through bones. Another man claimed he saw smoke that night, not from a chimney, from a circle of fires in the clearing below the ridge, fires that burned green like witch flames. Delmore never confirmed a word, but after that, something in him shifted. He stopped carrying his badge, stopped talking about outlaw. He started warning people, quiet warnings, the kind that freeze your blood. "If you hear a woman calling your name in those woods," he told the blacksmith one night, "don't answer. No matter what she says, don't answer." From then on, the sheriff became a ghost in his own town. He walked Cades Cove like a man already dead, muttering to himself, sometimes scratching symbols into the dirt with his boot. Nobody knew what they meant. Some said it was protection, others said it was confession. And in Y Hollow, the trails grew darker. Men stopped hunting, but the dolls kept showing up, tucked in tree knots, nailed to fence posts, left on doorsteps like warnings, each one carved with a little more care, a little more human. The winter of 1929 didn't just take lives, it spilled blood into the snow. It began with livestock. Cows ripped open, their bellies steaming in the cold. Sheep vanished, their tracks leading toward Y Hollow and ending in nothing but wind-blown drifts. Neighbors muttered about wolves, but wolves don't leave patterns. Wolves don't gut a pig clean and take only the liver. Then came the man they couldn't ignore. Harvey Price, a mill hand from Maryville, decided to settle his own fear with a rifle. Folks said he'd been drinking hard that night, swearing loud in the tavern that he'd teach them mountain spinsters some manners. He left with a lantern and his Winchester, vowing to bring back proof. He never brought back anything. 2 days later, hunters found his lantern smashed at the edge of the hollow, and 30 yards beyond, a red trail slashed through the snow, wide, heavy, dragging something that fought hard at first and then didn't. They followed it until the trees closed in so tight the light died between them. There, they saw it, a stump black with blood, and nailed into its surface a square of denim cloth, the same kind Harvey wore to the tavern. Beside it, something worse. A carving knife, its handle polished smooth with use, driven into the stump like an offering. The sheriff said nothing. He was still walking like a dead man, his boots dragging through Cades Cove dirt, eyes fixed on something far away. When folks tried to press him, he whispered the same thing every time. "Leave it be. You poke that hollow, it'll bleed you out too." But fear makes fools. Young men started talking about going up there in a pack, rifles, torches, dogs. Burn them out. End it. They never did, because one by one those same boys started finding things on their doorsteps at dawn, a doll for each of them, carved rough, faces blank, heads crowned with hair, real hair, and in their chests, not cloth this time, something slick, coppery, a piece of meat, blackened at the edges, pinned with an iron nail. No one spoke after that. Not a word. Men locked their doors, women hung crosses above the hearth, and the mountains pressed in, silent and watching. From that winter forward, Y Hollow wasn't just a place on a map. It was a wound that wouldn't heal. And the Walker sisters, they weren't just hiding anymore. They were hunting. Next, we uncover the chilling evidence hidden inside the Walker cabin, and the night Cades Cove almost burned them alive. The cabin smelled wrong. Sheriff Delmore pushed open the door, his rifle raised, breath fogging in the cold. Behind him, 2 deputies and the pastor clung to their nerves. The place was warm, too warm for a house that hadn't seen visitors in years. The hearth glowed low, logs burned to embers, as if someone had just stepped outside. At first glance, it looked simple. Crude wooden chairs, a rough-hewn table, quilts folded neat on a bench. But there was a feeling in that room, heavy, damp, like a cellar after rain. Then they saw the dolls, dozens of them. Some hung from rafters on twine, turning slowly in the draught. Others sat in rows along a shelf, blank faces smoothed with grease, hair pressed into their scalps. And every single one bore a strip of cloth nailed to its chest, plaid, denim, gingham. One deputy gagged when he saw the hair. The sheriff didn't blink. He walked to the hearth, knelt, and stirred the ashes with the barrel of his rifle. Something pale slid out from the coals, a long bone, stripped clean. Not deer, not hog. "God help us," the pastor whispered. Delmore stood, jaw tight. "Don't speak that here." They searched the cabin. Under the floorboards they found jars, dozens of them, sealed with wax, floating in cloudy brine. Inside, pale lumps of flesh curled like drowned worms. One jar cracked when a deputy dropped it. The smell hit hard, sweet, rotten, human. And then there was the spring house. The lock had been smashed, the door sagging open. Inside, meat hung from hooks, wrapped in muslin, dripping pink onto the dirt floor. But it wasn't just meat. Someone had carved names into the wooden beam above each hook. Grace, Harvey, others they didn't recognize. The sheriff ordered it all burned, every stick of it. By nightfall, smoke twisted above Wye Hollow like a funeral shroud. They didn't speak as they watched the cabin crack and fall, sparks bleeding into the dark sky. They didn't tell anyone what they'd seen. But the sisters, they weren't in the fire. They weren't in the hollow. They had vanished. That night, Delmore returned home, locked his door, and poured whiskey until his hands stopped shaking. Before dawn, someone knocked once on his back door, soft, slow, 3 times. When he opened it, the porch was empty, but on the step lay a doll, its head crowned with grey hair. His wife's hair. The whispers spread faster than wildfire. By spring of 1927, every soul in Cades Cove knew what Sheriff Delmore and his men had found in that cabin, or thought they knew. Dolls with human hair, meat hanging like butchered hogs, names carved in wood. Nobody spoke it loud in church, not in the general store, not where ears could twist it into gossip. But at kitchen tables and under oil lamps, folks talked of one thing. The sisters had turned from God, turned from decency, turned into something else. The missing teacher, the lost hunter, the bones in the fire, it all fit now. The sheriff tried to shut it down, told folks to leave it alone, that the cabin was gone, that the sisters were likely dead or gone for good, but the stories wouldn't die. Then came the livestock killings. Hogs slit open in their pens, meat stripped to bone, a calf found drained and stiff as cordwood, and always the same sign left behind, a doll, rough-carved, blank face, hair nailed to its head. That spring, the men of the cove gathered in secret. They met in the back of the blacksmith shop after sundown, lanterns turned low. 20 men with shotguns and kerosene, their faces hard as old timber. They weren't talking law, they were talking fire. Burn the hollow, burn every trace of it. But one voice stopped them, Reverend Amos Larkin. He'd been quiet through most of it, hat in his lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When he spoke, it came soft but sharp as a knife. You burn that mountain. You burn your own souls. There's blood up there already. Don't make it worse. Some argued, some cursed him, but in the end, the men set down their guns. The fire that would have cleansed Wye Hollow never touched a match. They left with fear still chewing their bones, and something else, relief. Because truth be told, none of them wanted to walk that ridge in the dark. Not after the sheriff's stories, not with the thought of those dolls staring from the trees. But fire wasn't the only thing the Hollow would escape that year. Summer came, and with it, new disappearances. This time, not strangers, not travelers, people from Cades Cove itself, folks whose names rang too close to home. And one of them was a child. It started on a July evening so quiet you could hear the creek talking over stones. Her name was Annie Lawson, 8 years old, blonde hair tied with a red ribbon her mama stitched herself. She'd gone out after supper to pick blackberries along the fence line, same as she'd done 100 times before. Her mama watched her from the porch, humming a hymn. But the hymn turned into silence, and silence turned into panic. When the sun dropped behind the ridge and Annie hadn't come back, her father grabbed a lantern and called for her. His voice rolled through the holler, swallowed by the trees. No answer. By midnight, half the men in Cades Cove were out with dogs and lanterns. They combed the fence line, the trails, the blackberry thickets. They called Annie's name until their throats burned raw. At dawn, they found something. Not Annie, not a shoe, not a scrap of cloth. A doll. It leaned against the split-rail fence like it was waiting, 2 feet tall, rough-carved, blank face, and tied to its chest with twine. A red ribbon, Annie's ribbon. Some men cursed, some crossed themselves. All of them felt the same thing. She hadn't wandered. She'd been taken. The search stretched for 3 days. They dragged the creek, scoured caves, even climbed into the high laurel thickets where bears' dens lay hidden. Nothing. No body, no blood, no tracks. Just that doll. Sheriff Delmore rode hard to the Hollow. He didn't take a posse this time, just 2 deputies brave, or foolish, enough to follow him. They reached the old homestead by noon. The cabin still stood, grey as bone, its roof sagging like a tired beast. Inside it smelled of damp earth and something worse, something sweet and rotten. And in the corner, under a threadbare quilt, lay 6 more dolls, each one marked with something personal, a button, a braid, a scrap of gingham, and carved into the wall behind the 6 names: Grace, Eliza, Martha, Louisa, Nancy, Hetty. The sisters were keeping their own ghosts close, but on the floor, carved deeper than all the rest, was a 7th name: Annie. The sheriff didn't speak of what else he saw that day, not to his deputies, not even to his wife. But when he came down from the Hollow at sundown, his hands shook on the reins, and that night, he wrote something in his ledger he'd never written before. Not a crime of man, a curse of place. Not a, Sheriff Delmore didn't sleep the night they carved Annie's name into his mind. He sat at his kitchen table with a bottle of rye, staring at his ledger, the one where he wrote the truth no one would ever see. He knew 2 things for certain. Annie Lawson was gone, and the Walker sisters were to blame. But there was no court that could hold them, no jury that would understand what he saw in that cabin. Those dolls, the names, the smell that clung to his clothes like death. He could bring them in, sure, haul them down the mountain in shackles, and let the town gawk like carnival folk. But would that stop it? Would that cure whatever rot had taken root in Wye Hollow? He didn't believe it would. So he made a choice that would haunt him until his grave. He stayed quiet. Delmore rode back up the Hollow 2 days later, alone this time. He carried no warrant, no deputies, just his service revolver and a sack of supplies, coffee, lard, flour. When he reached the cabin, the sisters were waiting on the porch, like they knew he was coming. They didn't speak, didn't smile, just watched him with eyes as flat as creek stones. He stepped off his horse, set the sack on the ground, and said the only thing his pride could choke out: "No more children." Louisa, the oldest, the one they called the matriarch, stepped forward. Her hair was grey as ash, braided down her back like a rope. She nodded once, slow. Then she said something that froze the marrow in Delmore's bones. "You keep the world away from us, Sheriff, and we'll keep our peace." A bargain. Simple, terrible, binding. And Delmore kept it. For years. He stopped the hikers who strayed too far, warned off hunters who wanted the high ridges. When the Park Service came sniffing about new boundaries, he steered them south, told them the land up in Y Hollow was useless, barren, not worth the trouble. And it worked, mostly, and the sisters stayed in their hollow like ghosts tethered to old timbers. People forgot them, except in whispers, but bargains with darkness never hold forever. In 1936, a new kind of trouble came up those mountains. Men in green uniforms with shiny badges and maps rolled out on tables. The government wanted a park, a grand one, bigger than any in the East, and Y Hollow was right in the middle of their plans. The sheriff's secret? It was about to collide with Washington's progress, and when that happened, the Walker sisters didn't just resist. They fought. In 1936, the Smoky Mountains were no longer just wilderness. They were a dream for Washington, a shining new national park meant to lure tourists, boost the economy, and preserve American heritage. But heritage doesn't always want preserving. Sometimes it fights back. Survey crews came first. Men in pressed khakis, snapping photos, pounding stakes into soil that had never felt an outsider's boot. They talked of trails and roads, of maps and progress. But in Y Hollow, those stakes didn't stay in the ground. On more than one occasion, crews returned to find every marker ripped out, splintered, or burned to ash. Chainsaws vanished, horses spooked. Once a mule was found dead, throat cut ear to ear, its body dragged across the trail like a warning. The men reported strange encounters too. Voices echoing in the timberline, shadows moving uphill faster than any deer. One crew swore they saw a woman standing among the trees at dawn, her dress black as coal, her hair braided like a noose. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared until the men broke camp and ran. By autumn, rumors reached the higher-ups. Isolated locals resisting relocation, the report said. But what no report mentioned, what no man dared write down, was what those locals were willing to do. The Walker sisters weren't just resisting, they were hunting intruders. In October, a surveyor named William Tate went missing. Last seen heading into Y Hollow with a transit tripod and a packed lunch, whistling like it was just another day. Search parties found his tripod 2 weeks later, leaning against a cedar tree like someone had placed it there on purpose. His pack was empty. His body, never found. After Tate vanished, the government took notice. Rangers came armed now, rifles slung, revolvers holstered. They knocked on cabin doors, wagons parked like sentinels, asking questions they didn't want answers to. But no one talked. Not the farmers, not the loggers, not the moonshiners. Sheriff Delmore knew why. He'd kept his bargain for nearly a decade, kept the world away, kept the sisters' peace. But now, with Washington breathing down his neck and men disappearing in the hollow, he felt the weight of every choice pressing on his chest. The sisters wouldn't move. He knew that like he knew his own name. And if the government forced them out, Delmore feared what he'd find nailed to trees before the snows came. Still, he rode up to Y Hollow one last time to try and reason with Louisa, to beg her to yield. What she told him that day froze him to the marrow, and hinted at the secret that had kept them bound to that land long after reason should have driven them out. Sheriff Delmore climbed the narrow path to the Walker homestead with his hat pulled low against the chill. The mountain was silent that day, too silent. Even the birds had abandoned Y Hollow. He found Louisa waiting for him at the split-rail gate, a thin figure in a black dress that seemed older than she was. Her hair, long and streaked with silver, hung in 2 heavy braids over her shoulders like ropes. She didn't greet him, didn't even blink when he dismounted. "You should have sent a letter," she said finally, her voice flat as stone. would have saved you the trouble of the climb. Delmore told her what he came to say, about the park, about the government surveyors, about Washington's plans to claim this land. He tried to keep his voice firm, but it came out tight, like a man walking a wire over a pit. "They're building roads," he said, "trails, camps. There'll be people up here soon, Louisa. Families, children. It's not safe for you to stay." Her mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. "Safe," she repeated, like the word was foreign. "We've been safe here since before you were born. Safer than anyone in town." Delmore swallowed. "Please," he said, lowering his voice. "They'll force you out. Don't make them do that. It'll get ugly." That was when Louisa looked up, and Delmore saw her eyes for the first time in months. They were pale as river stones, cold and bottomless. "They can take the trees," she said softly. "They can take the dirt, but they won't take what's under it." Delmore frowned. "What do you mean?" Louisa leaned on the gate and fixed him with a stare that felt older than the mountains themselves. "You've been good to us, Sheriff," she said. "Better than most. But there are things in this hollow older than the law, older than the park, things that don't belong to Washington, things that don't forgive." She stepped closer then, so near he would smell the wood smoke in her hair. "If they dig here," she whispered, "they won't just find bones." Delmore felt something slide cold through his veins. He wanted to ask, wanted to demand an answer, but her eyes held him still like a snake fixing a bird. Then she opened the gate, slow and deliberate. "Go on now," she said, "while you still can." Delmore left without another word. He didn't look back. That night he wrote the first of a series of letters that would never make it to Washington, because deep down he knew Louisa wasn't bluffing. Whatever was under that land, it was worth killing for. By the summer of 1933, the Walker sisters had lost nearly everything to the government. The park had claimed their land piece by piece, until the cabin and its outbuildings stood like stubborn teeth in an empty jaw. But there was one thing no one touched. The spring house. Surveyors logged it in their notes, marked it on their maps, but none of them ever went inside. They said the place stank of rot, that the air was thick and wrong, heavy like breathing through wet wool. One man swore he heard humming, low and steady, coming from beneath the stone floor. He never went back. For years, locals whispered about the spring house. It sat 100 yards downhill from the cabin, where the earth dipped into shadow. Its walls were built from rough-hewn stone, black with age and slick with moss. No windows, one wooden door, warped and swollen from decades of damp. Inside, a narrow channel carried mountain water through the center, pooling in a trough where milk crocks and butter molds once sat in the cold. But by the time the government came, the trough was empty. The floor beneath it was not. The first hint came when a CCC worker, a young man named Ellis Moore, was sent to assess the structure for demolition. He pried up a loose stone and found a cavity beneath. Inside the cavity was a fragment of something pale, bone, not deer, not bear, human. Ellis told his foreman. The foreman told no one. He ordered the stone replaced and sent Ellis down to Cades Cove to work on a bridge crew instead. But Ellis didn't let it go. That night he came back with a lantern. What he found made him drop it. The floor of the spring house wasn't just stone. It was a lid. Slabs fitted so tightly they formed a seamless seal. When Ellis pried one up, cold air breathed out from the dark below. His lantern light reached just far enough to show him a stair, cut into the earth, spiraling dough. And on the first step, carved deep into the rock, was a single word: blood. Ellis